Hey witches, Tiffany here. Today we are discussing working with ancestors. A tradition during this time of year approaching Samhain is setting up an ancestral altar. But this is not the only time of year, and an ancestral altar is not the only way that you can honor the dead. First, just to be clear, I think we need to define the term ancestor. So by the dictionary definition, an ancestor is anybody preceding your grandparents that you are blood related to. But don't feel limited by that definition. For many of us who do ancestral work, ancestors can mean anybody that you cared about that has passed on and anybody who has passed on that you are related to. So that can include biological relatives, non-biological relatives, friends, beloved pets, and mentors. It can also mean spiritual ancestors, so those who practice what you practice, who believe what you believe, who came long before you. So setting aside ancestors such as pets, friends, recently deceased family members, most of us don't know the names of many of our ancestors. Now, for some people, they know a lot of their lineage going back, but there's no way to know all of it. And there are people like me that don't know the names of people who passed away only a few decades before they were born. Is it sad that there's a lot of forgotten people and a lot of forgotten history? Yes. But just because you don't directly know them doesn't mean that they don't know you. Just because you don't know their name or their face or how many people there are that you could potentially contact doesn't mean you can't reach out to and work with them. So why would somebody want to work with ancestors? Well, why not? Why not honor them and keep their presence in your life? You literally owe your existence to your bloodline. You would not be here if it weren't for them. And for things like spiritual ancestors, you would not have the knowledge that you have if it weren't for them. So why not honor that, appreciate that, show gratitude for that? Then they can also provide protection and guidance. Honestly, they are most likely already doing this for you, but ancestor veneration is a great way to show gratitude for this. But it also creates a stronger bond. There's more of a back and forth. You can reach out to them and let them know what you need instead of them just sort of watching what's happening in your life and sending a bit of guidance, sending a bit of protection. If there is something that you need specific protection from or specific guidance on, you can make those requests if you've built up that bond. Once you give them deeper access to your life and once you give them a much more, straightforward permission to influence your life, trust me, you will be pleasantly surprised in how they do so. And finally, kind of like I already mentioned, where you can ask them for specific guidance or specific protection, you can also ask them for a favor or for help. Much like you would call upon a deity while doing spell work, you can call upon your ancestors, whether in a general sense or on a specific one, to assist you in ritual or manifestation. So let's get down to it. How do you open communication and honor them? Before you go asking for favors, you need to build a relationship first, just as you would with deity or really anyone. Now, this can take a bit of time, so please be patient. Some can come really quickly, especially those that you knew in life, and some can take weeks or even months to start making their presence known, and some never do. But I really encourage you that no matter how long it takes, no matter how many start influencing your life or making their presences known, just keep at it. It is so worth it. For a bit of a personal reference or example, I know very little about my ancestors. I know that my dad's great-grandpa or possibly his great-great-grandpa immigrated from Norway and at some point in time wound up in Iowa. And that's about it. On my maternal side, the only person that might know a little bit of information I don't speak to, most of my family does not speak to. So aside from my 23andMe report, which is, not very specific outside of percentages, I have very little to go off of. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that experience. That's a very common experience for a lot of people, whether you're adopted, whether you are from a family of immigrants, whether recently or way back when. Going further down the family line can be very tricky. I'm very cut off from my roots, and it has taken a lot of time to open the channel of communication, but the bond is still there. You have to know that. It's literally in your blood. So once again, just because you don't know a name or a face or an exact location doesn't mean it's not possible. I found it easiest to start connecting with those that I knew in life. Now, that wasn't very many because I'm very fortunate and I haven't lost many people in my life, but I did start with those ones and also those pets as well. Honestly, I've lost more pets than people, but it's those who I can still hear the sound of their voice. I can still picture their face. But I know that I personally also just found it a lot more comfortable to reach out to somebody I have literally spoken to in actual life while both of us were living, as opposed to just, like, hey, great grandma on my mom's side. What's up? Starting off with the recent dead, even if you only have vague memories of them from childhood, is a great way to open the gates and start to reach further beyond the veil. From there, it's much easier to start reaching further down the chain, further down the line, and reaching the more distant dead. Both because, like I said, you're opening the gates, you're starting to reach in, but also for yourself, you are starting to get used to this practice. Over time and with more practice, it's going to be easier for you to reach further, but also easier for you to sense more. And the recent dead will also come to you much faster and much more willingly because they knew you in life. They have a much more vested interest in seeing that you are safe, successful, and happy. One of the most helpful things that you can do is create an ancestral altar, of course. Not only is this a sacred space where you'll be honoring them, but it's much like your own sacred space and your own altar for your other practices. It gets you into the mindset of, when I'm working here, I am doing this task. I like to have my regular ritual witchcraft spellwork altar. I have a section for honoring Hecate, I have an ancestral altar, and I have a separate space for meditation. Those are 4 separate spaces, all for kind of getting me into a different state of mind, but also honoring each of these practices and all of these different entities. In my opinion, they all deserve their own little spaces. But of course, this really depends on your own personal practice, what you feel is right for you, and honestly, how much space you have. Don't feel that setting aside a whole separate altar is a completely necessary thing, but for those of you who are limited on space, or at least limited on finding kind of secretive space, personally, I think that the ancestral altar is the easiest one to hide in plain sight. I have a credenza in my living room where I keep pictures framed on the wall and on the actual table. Now, these are pictures mostly of current living people, so I don't consider that my ancestral altar, but if you wanted to, you could just kind of like scoot those to the side and have a little section of the deceased. Just a little tip, but it's up to you. I'm totally getting off track. Now, there is some debate as to where to place the altar. There are some people that say it should not be in your house at all, it should be outdoors. There are other people that say, and I would say most people that I've heard from anyway, say keep it in your house, but not directly in your bedroom because it can affect your sleep. And then there's other people who say you should keep it in your bedroom by where you sleep, because then it's more likely that they are going to be able to step into and influence your dreams and communicate with you through dreams. The reality is there is no one right way to do it. I suggest you just do whatever feels right and whatever is completely practical. And if it ends up being a problematic spot, you know, maybe it's in the living room, but everybody keeps touching it and moving things, or you have it in the bedroom and it is messing with your sleep, or it's outside and you find that you feel really disconnected from it because you're not actively seeing it every day, don't worry, you can always move it later. So really just experiment with that one. So what should you have on it? Well, much like an altar for a deity or your own sacred space, this is a deeply personal thing, and I can't really tell you exactly what you should have on it, but of course, I'm trying to give you tips here. So here is a list of things that I would suggest. Take what you want and leave the rest behind. As always, I'm going to remind you guys to get creative with this and definitely make it beautiful, but your ancestral altar can be as simple or as elaborate as you want. It's completely up to you. Probably the most obvious suggestion is pictures of the deceased, but I'm also going to add on to that by including items that they owned, ashes if they were cremated and you happen to have their ashes in your possession, dirt from their grave, or anything that makes you feel connected to them. If you know of something that they liked or they enjoyed, something symbolic of them, put that out. You can also put out things that make you feel connected to your heritage. And this is especially great for reaching back to those past generations, and even further to those ancient ancestors that you don't really know. This could be something culturally specific, or it could even be a printout of a map of the region that you know they resided in, or a flag from the country. Also put out symbols for family, especially your family specifically. I don't have an actual family tree to reference, but I do have some imagery of a tree on my ancestral altar. You could do a family tree, you could do a family crest if you have one. You can put up a list of as many family surnames as you know. You can even put out a clipping of your own hair, so you literally have your genetic tie displayed on your altar. Next is symbols honoring death. In honoring death, you are honoring the dead. So place out skulls, bones, dried flowers, seashells, fossils, whatever represents death to you. You can also utilize symbols of the 4 elements, but not everybody does this, so again, it's up to you. I like to place out symbols of the material world, things that will remind them of their life. I find that symbols of the 4 elements is a great way to do that, to put out that little reminder for them. Finally, offerings, especially of things that you know they liked or they may have liked. If you're like me and you don't have a lot of information to work with, you can always put out any kind of food and beverage. I mean, maybe not any kind, not like soda and some Cheez-Its. I mean, unless that's what they liked. But typically some sort of baked good and some sort of alcoholic beverage. But if you do know anything about any of them, try to incorporate that information. So if you perhaps know what region they're from and during what time frame, maybe try to find a food that was made and was very common in that time in that region. You don't even have to go with food though. You could also place out flowers that were native to that region. Just make sure they were native to that region at the time, like originally native there, because lots of plants got introduced over time to different areas, so do a little bit of research. But again, really any information that you have to work with is great. If you know that like 5 generations ago, one family owned a chicken farm, put out a chicken egg. It's also great to regularly light a candle on your altar and place out a bowl of water. So finally, once you're done setting up your altar, make sure to, actually invite them to come hang out and partake in your offering. When I do this while placing out my offerings, personally, I like to call out the names of those that I actually knew, then sort of a general call to any other ancestors whose names have been forgotten or lost to time to come and join. I do want to say here that you do not have to invite everyone. If there is a family member that you do not want a connection to at all, you can straight up say, yo, you are not welcome here. Don't feel obligated to invite everybody into your space. I will have a final note on that sort of thing, but we'll put it to the end of the video. In the meantime, let's keep going. Another way to work with and honor the dead is to open a channel up to them, whether this is at your ancestral altar or just anytime, anywhere. This is just like communicating with deity. You can pray to them, you can call upon them in times of need, whether, you're doing spell work, or if you're having a rough time, or you're scared, you're sad, whatever. You can meditate or perform divination with the intention of speaking directly to them, asking them for advice, asking them questions. And then, of course, as I briefly mentioned earlier, you can always invite them to come and visit you in your dreams. Now, this is great to do right when you're in that zone. You're right in between consciousness and full-on sleep. Now, with this opening the channel to communication, keep in mind that spirit communication is often very, very subtle. You will have to start paying attention to signs around you. After you've had a dream, make sure to sit down as soon as you wake up and journal about it. Write down any symbols or imagery that really stood out to you that you saw. Because communication from spirit can come in many different and often symbolic forms. And if you're new to this, it may take a bit of time to kind of grow that intuition, but over time, it will become easier to recognize when it's happening and to decipher. And honestly, I find that it's a lot easier to recognize from ancestral spirits than it is from just like any other spirit. And again, you gotta be a little patient. Next, anytime you drink your favorite beverage or eat your favorite food, do so in their honor. If you want to leave some as an offering, you can, but you can also just enjoy it yourself and the symbolic gesture is still there. I'll often do this if I'm going out to eat and the food is especially good. I kind of, sort of dedicate it to them. But I can't exactly leave it on the table and ask the busser to don't clear that away. Leave it overnight, please. But if you want to, you could of course always bring a little bit home, put that out as an offering, but it's entirely up to you. You can always just sort of eat it in veneration of them. If you can, visit places that they've been, whether that's a town that they lived in, their old house, or even just their favorite vacation spot. Touch the walls that they touched, walk the streets that they walked, smell the same smells. Even if the place looks completely different, you never know when you're gonna drive by a tree that they walked by, when you're gonna gaze at a hill that they've gazed at. We all leave prints where we've been, and by going to these places, you are sharing that space with them. Hey witches, Tiffany here. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up like button. I really appreciate it. It helps me out a lot. And if you're interested in a little bit more content every month, you can always subscribe to my Patreon. The link for that is down below in the description box. Okay, back to the video. In that same vein, do something that they did. Share that experience with them. If it's something fun that they enjoyed, talk to them, tell them to come and join you. If it was something that perhaps they did for work, not necessarily fun, you can get an idea of what their day-to-day life was like. You can sort of step into their shoes, empathize with them and understand them a little better. It's also about that effort to try to understand them a little better. If you have no idea what their hobbies were, that's okay. You can pick something general. I'm sure there is somebody in your family line who enjoyed dancing or singing or taking evening walks. As for doing some of their work, you may not be able to do exactly what they did. Like if your great-great-grandfather was a welder, you can't just go into a factory and be like, hey, let me work here for a day. But if somebody in your line was perhaps a farmer, you could go out and garden. Sure, it's only a fraction of what they felt and did every single day, but it will give you a general idea. You are still going to feel, your hands sinking into the soil, putting a seed in the ground and creating life out of it. You're still gonna feel those aches and pains of bending over to weed. You feel that pressure in your knees as you're kneeling on the ground. Again, it's not quite the same thing, but get as close to it as you can. There are still body aches and pains. There are still successes in bringing life out of the ground that can get you sort of on a similar level to that. And again, it's about that effort that you're putting in to try to understand them, to try to feel closer to them. And also keep in mind, if you have absolutely no idea what anybody did, say you're adopted, or you just literally have no records of anything, everybody's passed away or something, remember that we are all descended from hunter-gatherers. Again, fortunately, most of us don't have to go out combing the land every day in order to eat. So we'll never quite understand the imperative need to go out and do that activity. And we have the luxuries of modern footwear and modern backpacks and things like that, of course. But you can still go out and spend a day out in nature, go hiking, and try to keep your eyes out for maybe things that they would have noticed. You don't necessarily have to actually collect and forage things if you don't want to, especially like me. I would be scared that I would accidentally pick like a poisonous berry. But you could either forage for things that you might use in spell work, or that just looks interesting or unique, doesn't necessarily have to be edible. It could be stones, leaves, flowers, tree bark, or at the very least, you can get out there and feel the physical work of combing the land like that, and just the mental work that it takes to constantly be, viewing your surroundings, scanning your surroundings, looking for, viable options. Next is the very, very popular Samhain tradition of hosting a dumb supper. You set places at your table, you serve up food, you invite the dead to your table, and then you dine in complete silence. Like I said, this is a tradition for Samhain, and while it might be a little expensive to get groceries to do all that on a weekly basis, you can do this more often than just Samhain. I like to do it every feasting occasion, as much as time and money will permit. I'm not gonna buy a second turkey for this purpose on Thanksgiving. I'm sorry. You can always perform a dumb supper on any Sabbath or holiday where a feast is common. Finally, think about them. Talk about them. People live on through their stories, and our ancestors want to live on through these stories. Even if you don't have specific stories of them, read about the history of their region. Read about the history of the time that they were in their region, especially. If you knew them in your lifetime, call upon memories of them and think about it, reminisce about it. If you have photographs, look at them. If you didn't know them, perhaps try to picture what their faces would look like, taking on a different expression than what's in the photograph. Now, if you're doing this with somebody that you knew in life, I understand that this can be a painful process at times. When I think about my close friend who passed away a few years ago at a much too young age, one of the things that I can't help but bring to mind is the day that she passed. It can be really hard to push the memory of her final day out of my head, as well as all of the emotions that came with that day. But it's okay. Let that memory, let those emotions wash over you and then release them. As trite as it sounds, I take comfort in knowing that the only reason that day, that time period was so painful, the only reason that now, years later, I still grieve her is because I know that I loved her so much and that she loved me. So when that moment of grief subsides and I remember that, honestly, that is when I feel her presence the strongest. And that's just a personal thing. I'm not saying you need to feel that grief and that pain all over again to feel their presence very strong. I just know that for me personally, with this particular person, that's when I feel it the strongest. And I feel like that's just sort of in her nature. Usually right away, a funny memory pops up into my head afterward. And I feel like it's her way of being like, no, just think about those good times. So keep them alive, both in your memories, in your thoughts, and in speaking about them. Pass their memories on to other people, even if it's people who never remembered them. But also, rile up their memories in the minds of people who did know them. You know, say, hey, remember that time? And talk about it. Talk about them. This is really one of the best ways that you can honor your ancestors. So a final note on something I did want to mention, I just didn't want to, it felt a little bit clunky and out of place to put it earlier in my script, but I do want to say it before I close out. So I mentioned that you can tell someone in particular that they are not welcome at the party. This is your sacred ancestral space. When you're looking at your altar and where you want to work. But also, this is your life. I strongly advise you, if there is somebody you do not want contact with, do not feel bad telling them no. So if you have an abusive or a toxic family member that is now deceased, you are not obligated to keep them in your life or to honor them in any way. In fact, I highly encourage you to just completely avoid them. Why invite their presence back into your life? Death does not take a horrible person and turn them into a good person. It does not completely erase all of the damage that they did to you or your family. Now, I know this can be tricky at times because sometimes these relationships and people's feelings surrounding these relationships can be very, very convoluted, often very contradictory and very confusing. And that's okay, really. Just do whatever you're comfortable with. If you want to think about maybe inviting them later, you can always invite them later. If you invite them and then you decide, I don't want this, you can always uninvite them. Tell them to get the hell out. But I do encourage you to, before inviting them, think long and hard about whether you want this person's presence back in your life or if you just want to keep them silent on the sidelines. Well, that's it for today. I'm super excited to finally be covering this topic, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Tell me about your experiences with ancestral work and honoring ancestors. Drop those in the comments below. If you have a picture that you are comfortable sharing of your ancestral altar, I would love to see it. Please post it on Instagram and tag me in it at Bewitching.Bemused. I think that's it. We have more spirit-related things coming up next week in the spirit of Samhain. I hate puns. Why did I make a pun? It's fine. So please look forward to that. I will try to avoid puns as much as possible. But that's it for now. I love you all so much. Thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed this video. And that's it. Stay magical.